So thank you everyone for joining us this morning for obviously our CMFO Roundtable. I like our three sessions topics today: lessons learned from COVID-19, COVID-19 vaccine in the workplace, and budgeting for 2021. Our first session, John Mooney is a CPA RMA with Nisivoccia. John Reinhardt has a whole bunch of initials after his name, and he primarily works at Wharton, I think, and a bunch of other places. Chris Battaglia, sorry, I butchered it. Also CMFO, works in a number of municipalities. And John Buck with Municipal Software. Go ahead, guys, take it away.
Katie, to give me a chance to share. Oh, there it is. All right, so the first test of the day, and I think that Bud just passed it, was how to correctly pronounce his last name. Right, it's been butchered for years, and we're finally going to fix it in one fell swoop. So the G is silent. So for everybody's benefit, is Chris Battaglia. Right, Chris?
You got it.
We sucked everybody into this one, everybody that loves to touch technology. So that the first part is, without a doubt, we have learned to work virtually, right? All of our white collar staff have reinvented how we work. A VPN is a virtual private network, whether you're using remote desktop, and I'm not sure everybody has this, but in Wharton we have an IP phone system. My phone follows me wherever I am, which is good and bad, but if but everybody that called me at town hall knew that they were getting me at my town hall phone because it was just right there. But I think that we've all reinvented what we're doing, whether we're scanning our documents so we can grab them remotely. And that's the whole point of the session, is to talk about what we've learned. And again, this is a roundtable, so we're looking for everybody's input into what you may or may not have done during this time. So I can tell you from Wharton's perspective, we took the CARES funding, the LGEF, because we didn't qualify, our county didn't qualify to receive the money. But I think it was 5,000 people, 5,000 or 7,000 people. It was just right there, but Marsh County did not qualify to get the CARES fund directly. But I have to tell you, in Wharton, we used a significant amount of these funds to invest in technology. We improved our routers, we bought laptops so people could work from home. We invested in more licenses so we could have people using the remote desktop or coming in by VPN. And we really reinforced everything. We bought a couple extra tablets for the governing body so that they can connect in. Significant investment in everything we did. Now, significant, we didn't get a ton of money. We're a small town, but we used a lot of it for that.
John, can I say something in there real quick?
Absolutely, jump in when you want.
Okay. As everybody is starting to work from home, from an administrator's point of view at a town, you have to make a decision where you balance ease of access versus security, and that's usually a job of an IT administrator. But a lot of towns and smaller towns don't have real IT administrators, so it falls on whoever in the town is making that decision, whether it's the town administrator, the CFO. So it's really easy to say, oh, okay, we'll just give them VPN access from their home PC. But that you really have to think before you do that. Investing in laptops is really the right way to go, because if you give them VPN access from a home PC, Oprah things aside, that PC might be shared among the entire family. You might have a teenager who's looking at different websites. You might have somebody else who's running games. So as soon as that PC then connects VPN into your network, that PC and whatever software is on that PC can have access to the entire township or city network. So you could open yourself up to liability. So purchasing laptops is definitely the way to go.
So that was the decision we made, is we really didn't want people using their personal devices. We wanted them using our devices, so we set them up, we controlled them. And we also added another layer of security, and for anybody connecting by VPN, they go through a multi-factor authentication, and they get another passcode that's sent to them to validate who they are. So we really focused on the security part of it. And I'm sure anybody that's a member of the MEL network knows that we've got a cyber task force in place. I happen to be the current chairman. We've been focusing on how to improve the security and what people do in their towns to fortify their networks and protect them. Any other questions?
Hey, John, yeah, I don't think that this is too different than just gaining access to your local bank account. We've been doing that for many years. They've got multiple levels of multi-factor authentication. Some people just put a password in, and maybe it's not a great password, and that's probably the lowest level of authentication. Some might have a message sent to their email. Some might have a physical token that they have to carry around with them all the time that they actually have to plug into the computer. So, it's definitely a trade-off between convenience and security. And with municipalities, I know that, there's probably plenty of people that are listening in right now that have heard horror stories about their data being held hostage. You have to pay them off in Bitcoin, or you have to take an image of your entire system and recreate the last couple of days of history. So it's a nightmare to deal with, and I think security is probably way more important than convenience in this particular case.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. But the difference with banks is a lot of times they'll have an entire IT professional staff, where the municipality is relying on either internal information, internal knowledge, or a PC technician that they hire to come in and take care of their PCs. So it's something that's often overlooked, and you have to think about it.
Agreed. And just having it be convenient is no longer a good enough excuse. Right, I think all of us have moved to a password keeper because our passwords keep getting crazier and crazier, and they change every 30 days. And you do variations of the same one, but that's not good enough. You've got to have something to help you keep track of it. All right, next one. So the next one is I touched on it before, that anybody as part of the MEL network knows that we've got a cyber task force. Fortunately, ahead of this, we went through a series of training with D2 to do our cyber training for all of our employees. We required 100% compliance. Anybody that was not trained, we shamed them into compliance because they had to do it. And it's amazing when we would test them and send out these test emails to see if they would click on it. My highest click rate came from my cops. They're out in the car and they're just clicking through stuff, and they would nail it every time. So I think they've now all been trained 3 times over. I think they're tired of the training, so they've learned that they've got to stop clicking, or we keep training them and they don't like it. We talked about the multi-factor authentication. I think Chris and JB talked about it. It could be whatever it is it does, whether it's an email, it's a text, it's something, but it's another way to validate that that's who you are. And I think Chris said, even if you've got a weak password, that adds a layer of security that strengthens that weak password. That the virtual private network, I'm big on that files shouldn't leave the office. And by using the VPN access into our network, everything stays there. It doesn't come out. I know a lot of people are using Dropbox and other cloud services to access their files or move them back and forth, but this is really a much more secure way of doing it. And the remote desktop is just easy because you're working on your desktop, so everything you had at work is there. I'm funny, I like to install it locally on the laptop, so at least my programs are running native there, and I'm not waiting for that delay if there's a communication. I touched on this before, is use of a personal device versus a company device. I'm big on that you should use the company device because it's set up the way we want it, and we don't have to worry about anything being compromised. Okay. So the additional benefits of going virtual, you always hear from the public works or the police, hey, town hall's closed. I want my time and a half now. Or how come that they get to do it and we don't get to do it? The last snowstorm, we closed town hall, but everybody grabbed their stuff from their desk or made their files virtual, and they were all working from home the next day during that storm. So what's funny is I was negotiating with Public Works, and they said, well, wait a second, you guys closed town hall. I said, it's right, we closed town hall, but they were all working. We're all virtual now. There is no such thing as a closed town hall anymore. So it changed that dynamic where they can no longer make that bitch or that gripe, and they don't get that time and a half. Not that I was going to pay them anyway, but they lose their argument because we're still working. The forced scanning and storage of information for remote access, I think everybody's been thinking more ahead of how to retrieve it as quickly as they can. So that's another way. And whether it's scanning or whether it's storing the native document where you can get it easily, it's just something that they've been rethinking how they operate. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides of that coin, right? Because I know personally, I've been working remotely for a long time, and I don't have a line between when I'm working and when I'm not working. And that's something that needs to be navigated, pretty carefully. The expectation to be available has to be managed. And, that's something that each person individually has to take into consideration. For me, the line is completely blurred. I'm working as long as I have access. That could be 16 hours that I'm awake for the day. And, it's a great benefit from a productivity perspective. And most of the way that I look at this is strictly from a productivity perspective. But I think that as we move along, there's going to be a lot of, trying to get a personal life in there and some mental health with being able to see people and work with people physically rather than virtually. But a lot of this is relatively new and needs to be navigated by each individual person to make sure that they're comfortable with the level of access that they have and they give to themselves.
Yeah, I actually want to comment on that also, because I'm the same way, where if I have work to do, I just continue doing it before I realize it's 10 o'clock at night. My thought on that is try to avoid, even I actually don't mind it. I'll sit in front of the computer and do work, but I catch myself looking at my subordinates, hey, how come you're not answering the phone at 7 o'clock at night? Or why aren't you answering the email? Like, I shouldn't have to expect them to do that just because I am doing that. So that is my only thought on it. It's not just managing yourself, it's managing your staff as well, and not putting expectations on them.
Yeah, and I know my slides are more towards the end of this presentation, but everything you're saying has impact on the audit and how this factors into the audit as well. And I won't do those now, but just to what Chris Batali was saying, he's working from his car today, for crying out loud. I mean, there's no more. It's almost like there's no more me time. You can't drive from point A to point B without having to jump in on a conversation or do something. So, just my 2 cents for now.
So I like when we first started closing down back in March of last year, and I remember I was on a couple calls. It's 11 o'clock at night, and my wife is leaning over the railing saying, "You realize it's 11 o'clock at night, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm not done." And everybody else was up, so why not keep working? But you're right; those lines get blurred pretty easily. And I think that people, for the most part, if they're a conscientious employee, if they're working from home and they've been given that ability to not have to go to the office, they tend to work a little harder. Their days are stretched out. They're just making up for it, especially if they feel guilty because they took a little bit longer for lunch or they decide to get on the treadmill. They're just making up for it. But they do get blurred very easily.
And there's some simple things that you can do. One of the things that I found, I'm not saying that it works for me, but if you have a separate section of your house, whether that's a certain chair that you sit in at the kitchen table or it's an office that you can close the door, that if you can basically just turn that into your workspace. When you're there, you're working, and when you're in other parts of your house, you're not working. It'll help you navigate that a little bit. And then to John's point about, with your employees, there's some productivity tools that you can, install add-ons for your email accounts that will, rather than sending that email at midnight when you're working, you can have it scheduled to send at 9 in the morning. so that it doesn't look like, so that when it doesn't, ring their phone and let them know that they have an email at 12 o'clock in the morning, and when they wake up, they feel like they're obligated to answer. So there are some tools that you can download and you can use to help with scheduling. The great thing about working remotely is I'm learning about new productivity software every day. And I try it out. You use free trials. You can test these things out and see what really works for you, to be able to help with creating that line.
Nice. So the next steps, municipal software. I've been talking to JB, and his software has been able to do this for a while, but we've been, instead of maintaining all that paper, and he will correct me in a second, because I didn't put it in the slide, JB, so you can put your points up there. But we're trying to move all from the paper, if we get an email, just to attach it to our transactions, so all the supporting documentation for that purchase or that expenditure is in the system. We're moving right now, we're still the traditional, we don't do any online or digital approvals, but this has made us rethink that. So instead of everybody signing that piece of paper, everybody will be digital, including my finance committee, who signs off on the bills list or the POs before they get cut into checks. And that's one of the things I called JB, and I said, hey, could we have an approval process that's post the bills list is created, but before the checks are authorized to be cut, so that my finance committee can come in, sign off on all of those items, and their concern is, well, can we see the backup? I said, absolutely you can. And that's what JB's been working on. I don't know if you want to talk about that, JB.
Yeah, a couple things. Well, first with the all attachments, that's been around for a while, not just in our software, it's even been around in our competitor software. It's just that you have to be aware of the document retention laws, that they have to be in a certain format. You can't just allow people to attach willy-nilly. I mean, you can, but then it doesn't meet document retention laws, so you have to keep the original around. So as far as emergency, everybody's working from home, let's attach stuff digitally, my thought on the process is you let them attach whatever they have, right? You're not going to force them to buy a specific scanner that scans into a specific type. You move the process forward so everything doesn't get backed up. You just instruct them to keep all the backup locally, and then monthly you go around and you collect that information for document retention. If you want to do document retention purely digital and really get rid of the paper, everything has to be stored in a TIFF or a PDF-A format. Those are the only two accepted by the state, and your system has to be certified for document retention. So as far as the approval process, we already have a check release digital approval process. We're going to expand on that to allow basically buckets that you can set up for your council members to go in and preview all the information and all the backup prior to a meeting and have it all signed off on, ready to go. We're just going to add that part to it so they can do that from their iPads on asynchronously on their own schedule.
I've taken that same approach, where we're keeping, and it could be as simple as we keep all the physical copies, throw them in a box saying delete, or destroy 7 years from now, or whatever the retention schedule says. Because, even with, once you get approved by the state to keep all your files digitally, you still have to be concerned about all the individual people that touch those files and whether or not they understand or realize that they have to maybe change a setting on the scanner to have a high enough DPI, or to save it as a TIFF file or a PDF-A or whatever the case is. And you end up kind of with muddy waters when you have half the files that meet the criteria and half files that don't meet the criteria. And now you're trying to figure out what you can retain and what you can't retain. And then, destroying the digital copies, I'm not really sure how the division manages that, so I can't comment too much. But if we don't have the physical or original copies anymore, when we get an OPRA request, we can simply provide them with the document that says we've been approved to destroy them, we've met our retention requirements, and we can't provide that record. Once you start going into digital, it gets a little bit more complicated. But I'm the biggest advocate of, I want everything in a PDF or digital format. And there's none of the offices that I work in, I deal with paper at all. I mean, the last paper that I had to deal with was signing note and bond documents, and that was about it. And physical checks. Otherwise, everything is remote. Everything is digital.
So we've got a couple comments now. So Bill Homa has posted, going virtual with town hall being closed has seen a significant increase in phone calls and emails. I think we've all seen that. I went up to, I'm getting 500 emails a day. It's crazy. And I think people thought that they had to prove that they were working at home and just firing off emails. It was horrible. I think we've all seen that.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite things to talk about, actually, with specific to emails and phone calls, right? Because the biggest issue with beginning the working remotely process in the pre-COVID world was the cultural change, right? So everybody's used to, if you're not in the office physically moving papers around, and they don't think you're working. And that has shifted pretty dramatically. And now people are overcompensating to try to, exactly what you just said, they're overcompensating and sending extra emails out. And I think that you need to have some pretty finite rules, or at least an understanding of when email is appropriate and when a phone call is appropriate, right? And I think that, if you have to go back and forth more than twice on an email wasn't appropriate for that conversation, right? Just pick up the phone. You can talk about it in 3 minutes rather than having to go back and check emails constantly. And there's a ton of research on it, and your productivity levels when you're constantly checking emails, and the notification pops up and you get distracted and you can't work on one thing at a time because you're waiting for a response in an email to something that could have been a 3-minute phone call. So there's a lot of navigation that has to go into how you manage your email. Whether that's you make an arrangement with your employees to check emails, at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. And if there's anything that happens that's important between those two times, you pick up the phone and you have a 5-minute phone call. But it's very interesting to read the research about productivity and email and how to manage it.
I agree. The second one came from Fabiana, who's saying that with the union employees, the problem is that when they're responding to emails after hours, you now need to worry about overtime. I think as long as you're clear in your expectations that that's not necessary, that they can respond to them during their working hours, I think that eliminates that. But I think you need to clearly state what your expectations are up front. We haven't had that with our employees in Wharton. I think they appreciate the flexibility. We've got a bunch of young parents that were figuring out their schedules to keep the kids going with school. So we had alternating work from home days, and we were very flexible. I think they appreciated that. Last one was Fred Knapp, is more of a comment, says the Fair Labor Standards Act and union contracts need to be reviewed, that's a good point, Fred. Anything else on next steps? All right, I'll move on.
All right, so now that you guys have all stolen every last ounce of my thunder, I'll go through my slides here and just kind of reiterate some of the things that have been said and some of the things that maybe add a little bit onto it. Going back to the VPNs and the and IT and technology, so important for us as an auditor, as an audit firm, just to add to those needs as well. Offsite backup is huge as well. We have offsite backup, and we have an agreement with someone else. Just in case anything ever happened, anything catastrophic happened to our building, our servers went kaput. We have the backup for what happened up to yesterday. So we are versed with that, and we would want to see you do that as well, just in case anything were to ever happen. But we can't. I can't tell you how important our IT department was to us throughout this crisis. And I've been a partner for 5 years now. some of my partners will say it feels like a lot longer, but I've been there for 5 years, and I'll take credit for what some of them did before I became a partner. And they made sure that IT was a huge factor in our business. And, you know, even when everything dropped off the face of the earth in mid-March last year and we all went remote, the only thing we really had to worry about was whether or not broadband was going to hold up, and is the infrastructure going to be good enough to have all the kids in America online now, businesses in America going online. And fortunately, you know, surprisingly, it did. For the most part, it did, and we were able to continue working. Some of our competitors had to lay people off, and never a good thing, but we were able to get through it, and we learned some efficiencies from it. And, you know, I'm going to talk to you about those here. You know, somebody once coined, and I wish I remember who told this to me, but I can't because it was so long ago. They said auditors are these soldiers that come in and they bayonet the wounded after the war is fought. And I couldn't agree with that more, all right? Your year goes by, everything gets done, and then we come in a month, 2, 3 months after your year end, clean up any problems that might exist and help you move on and close out the year. And, you know, I hate to say it's a necessary evil to have an audit, but it is. And we come in and it's good checks and balances, right? So we have a job to do, you have a job to do. Our most important goal, though, is to make sure the health and safety of both our clients and our employees come first. Without everybody's health and wellness, what's the point in all of this? So the first thing we got to do is make sure that we're in compliance. If you allow us to come in the building, happy to be there, more than happy to be there, want to be there, and we will always follow protocol that you put in place and for our staff and for us to come in. One of the things that we found that was effective for us and for you was remote access into your accounting software. Now, when I say remote access, it's read-only access. I do not want, and I cannot have the ability to go in and change your records. I need auditor eyes only. I don't want to make journal entries. I don't want to generate anything that I don't want to do anything to your numbers, right? Because once I do that, I lose my independence because I'm going to be auditing my own numbers at some point. So I want to avoid that. We only want read-only access. And that has helped us out in getting through all of the audits. Now, it doesn't eliminate us coming out to you completely. I would actually prefer to be out on the job site, because having those face-to-face conversations, you know, like Chris Battaglia was saying, you know, it eliminates, if you're having 3 emails back and forth, it's best to pick up the phone. Well, I'd rather have those conversations in person. Plus, I could read body language. I could see the expressions on your face. You know, I could tell when something's bothering you or this or that. So it's not foolproof as far as remote auditing goes. We do like coming out there, but we found that it is very important to be able to remotely work. And it limits the amount of interruptions we have with you, especially when there is auditor access for your system, right? If we can get in and get a report rather than ask you to print it out and then we sit around and wait for it for you to email us back, you know, it takes that timing out, and that's made us more efficient as a practice. And in terms with that, you know, as we grow, because the first stage was how do we do this on like March 17th last year. And now that we've done it for a full year, you know, what's the next step? What's the evolution in the electronic process? And one of the things we're doing as a firm is we're beta testing the request list. You know, we always have a list of items that we need from you. So we've asked a few of our clients to say, hey, do you want to beta test with us so that we can see if this works or not? And, you know, it's an automatic system. It's an automatic list that gets generated, gets sent to you. And then you start, you know, getting the documents prepared for us or in order, sending them to us. And as you do, the list goes down and down. And then there's automatic reminders set in. Maybe it's a week from now, maybe it's 3 days from now, that you get another email saying, okay, these are the items that are still open for your auditors. We're still working out the bugs of it, but we could see this as being the next step in the process. One of the other things that we found that was really good was the responses to the questions that we've had were coming back a lot quicker. You know, when we come in and set up shop for a week or 2 weeks, you know, sometimes you don't want to deal with us. You have payroll to do, vouchers to get together, bill lists to get together, and you really don't have a whole lot of time for us. But if we're not there, and you can do your work, well, then when we email or call with a question, we usually get that question answered pretty quickly. Did you want to say something, John? I don't know if you were. Nope. Okay. Sorry.
I can jump also to that point there. You know, what I've been doing is, as I go throughout the year, you know, we're talking about saving, you know, electronic documents. Throughout the year, I'm collecting all of the things that I know that I'm going to have to send to the auditors by the end of the year. So my payroll registers, my IROC reports, all the things that I have to do on a biweekly, semi-monthly, quarterly, et cetera basis, I just save them as PDFs. By the end of the year, I just create a folder. I give the auditors access to it. They have all my reports. All I have to do is, you know, my 1231 bank rec and, you know, run my year-end trial balance, and everything is done. So as soon as I get that done, they have all the reports, and there's no more issue of going back and trying to figure out, well, what did I do on January 3rd of last year in payroll? I don't have to rerun those reports or figure out if I still have access to certain items after 6 months if they purge from whatever software you're using. So you know, that's how I've been managing that.
Right. Yeah, and again, the sooner we get the information, the sooner we get done, we get out of your hair, and you get to move on. You know, one of the other points that's not on this slide that came up after the fact, I had a few of my in-charges, you know, send me responses back to that question. What were our efficiencies? Because they were the ones that worked with it, you know, hand in hand to begin with. And I got a lot of great feedback, and I know some of them are on the line, and I want to say thank you again. But one of the things that, you know, we noticed coming out of this, I noticed it for myself, I hear it from my panelists here, is that the hours have changed, right? I have a lot of younger families that are working for us, a lot of kids, a lot of little kids, some as many as 5 kids in one family. You know, I don't know, maybe we're not working him hard enough, but you know, 5 kids. And as you're working throughout the course of the day and you're home with a family, and kids are needy. I got a 14-year-old now, and you know, I remember how he was when he was 7 and 6, and he wanted to go outside and do this, that. And if he saw me here, you know, that meant it was time to play or do something. So I understand, and we understand that, you know, you get taken away from your day, and your day lasts a lot longer. But I actually hear that it's not as much of a problem working longer, because you do get to spend time with the family and you do get to do things. So perhaps it's an increase to your productivity when you do sit back down and work after all the kids are in bed and asleep. You know, it's kind of, we're learning as we go in all of this. And the nice part, again, going back to remote access, if we have remote access to your system, then we can log in at 10 o'clock and get the report that we need. We don't have to wait till the next day. So there are a lot of efficiencies in here. And as we still continue to grow and develop with this process, we're navigating how to make best use of them. But to me, and if we go to the next slide, there is some downside to all of this as well. You know, we miss the face-to-face. I like coming in and meeting with you, taking you out to lunch. I guess it'll be mask to mask for a while, but I like to get in there and see what's bothering you. You know, what's keeping you up at night. You know, how's your body language when we're discussing a topic? You know, what do you really feel like? Because I can't always sense that in an email, and that's the part that to me is a kind of a downside in all of this. So when we can get you back, when we can get back in, I know a lot of places are still closed to the public, but I know that a lot of places are still allowing their auditors to at least come in to do their work. And nothing makes me happier than to go out and get out of my office and come out and see you at a site visit. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment real quick. You know, we touched on this earlier, that the hours are kind of getting blurry. It's a lot of jobs, especially white collar jobs, can be done from to borrow a computer term, asynchronously. So everybody doesn't have to be working those 9 to 5 hours. They could be all broken up by individual, but it becomes very difficult from a manager's point of view to then manage that. So I'm actually still trying to get my head around it as I deal with employees.
And now I'm getting HR requests because I said that we didn't have enough work to keep that guy busy. Is there an attorney on the call? I need a good attorney.
Fred's here. So we have another comment here from Bill Homa. Says, I am also a tax collector, and Priority Search Services sends me the same email multiple times searching for information on the same property. He says he's asked them to stop sending him emails, so many. And another one from Bill says, when you have remote access, do you have to be familiar with MSI, Intersoft technologies? I think that would help, Bill. I think whatever system you're using, you have to be familiar with them.
Yes, and I can tell you that we have different people who are familiar with different technologies. So in our office, we can jump from one to the next to the next. You know, we have a lot of good resources that, yes, you do have to be a little bit familiar, at least with the software package that you're working with.
Move on to the next slide. So I asked Chris Battaglia to be on this panel because Chris for years has been telling us that his goal is that he never wants to go to the office ever again, that he wants to be working from the beach for the rest of his life, and that's his goal. So some of us have been doing this all along, which is why Chris is here, and he's got some positive input into the process of how to work remotely. So that is not Chris in the picture, though. He said I couldn't put a picture of him.
Are you in your car because you're on your way to the beach right now?
Could be.
Well, what I didn't tell John when he called me and asked me about this is that I'm actually doing a remote working experiment as we speak. I'm in Costa Rica right now. I actually just got down to the bottom of the hill because I have LTE service at the bottom and 3G at the top, and upload speeds are a little bit slower. So I'm looking at hummingbirds right now. It's 84 degrees, and I'll probably be ziplining this later this afternoon. But last night I was on a budget meeting, and I have another meeting this afternoon that I'll join, and I have access to all my documents, and I don't skip a beat. So while it's difficult when I'm sitting at home blurring the lines of just working for 16 hours straight, and I've noticed there's a noticeable difference in how much time I'm spending sitting in a chair at a computer. I've upgraded those. I have better monitors now. I'm hoping that saves my eyes a little bit, and I have a better chair. I'm hoping that saves my back a little bit. But I'm actually here with 4 friends of mine that are all doing the same. We're doing this experimental trip where there's really location independence now. There's no reason to be in town. There's no reason to be available for physical meetings when what we're doing right now is adequate. I've only had maybe a dozen physical meetings in the last year, and it puts you in a position where you can pretty much do everything that you need to do without physically being in person ever. And so I'm actually, this is my first experimental trip. I'll start doing these a little bit more often. I don't even tell anybody I'm going because there's no reason to. You don't skip a beat.
And there's no quarantining afterwards because you're virtual anyway. So
yeah, I actually have to get a test before I'm allowed back on an airplane next week. But yes.
Yeah. I actually just came back from the islands. We had to get tested too. Luckily, the place we were at did the test for us right there on the spot. But it was actually nerve-wracking because if you come back negative, even if it's, or come back positive, could be a false positive, then you're stuck there for 14 days.
Chris, we do have a request from one of the people, the attendees, is asking you to flip your camera around and prove that you're truly in Costa Rica.
Well, I mean, you can see, let's see, if I flip my camera around, you'll get my steering wheel. These are jungle trees. I'm definitely in the jungle.
That's great. So Chris's point,
woke up to some howler monkeys this morning.
Funny. And the last comment there is, with the video proof that he's jealous. All right, unless I don't see any questions for us, but I think that was it for us. There's nothing in the Q&A, and we've responded to all the comments.
Okay, so let's do a poll question then.
There is one Q&A. It says, hi, John. Says, particularly in larger communities, I would find it difficult to manage staff without having at least some time in the office. again, I think it comes down to how you situate yourself. You know, and you know, I guess it depends on your management style too. Do you need to be hands-on? Do you need to be there seeing them, or can you manage this process remotely?
That's the key word right there, John. It's process. You know, you have to implement procedures. You have to make this work. It's not gonna work on its own. So if you have tasks, you know, things you can really narrow what everybody is doing to task-based items that you can have receivables and deliverables, and you can really manage just by checklists, you know, of whether things are getting done, how they're getting done, and where the problems are. But you have to be able to create that process for yourself so you can manage the employees. You know, and I know that John mentioned, you know, Dropbox, and there's a couple of programs like OneDrive, all these cloud services, and there are ways to make it so that the files are redundant. You know, you can have the file save on your server in the office, but you can have it synced to the cloud so that you have access to it remotely without having to VPN in or anything. And you can have all of your employees save files to the same folders, and you can see when they were last updated. There's an audit trail of when they were edited and who's editing it. And you know, I've even had municipalities work with like Google Sheets, and you can leave notes, Google Docs. You leave notes as you make changes. You know, they're usually just working documents, not official documents. But there's a ton of management systems and technology that you can utilize to oversee that.
Right. See, what's funny is I was out with somebody recently, and they were saying that they get monitored from work, that if they have no keystrokes, that their work assumes that they're not working. And they found this, essentially, it's not a binder clip. It's almost like a wood clip that reaches over the bottom of the laptop and the top and sits around the escape key, and it constantly holds it down so it looks like they're typing nonstop on the computer. It keeps it awake. There's another program I just found, which is called Caffeinated, which also prevents your computer from sleeping and makes it appear that as if it's active. So we can do all we want to manage people. As long as you've got people with good work ethic, they're going to do the right thing.
Right.
But again, to the points, it's managing and your expectations and how you enforce it.
It's also going to be a huge game changer in how you hire. You know, you have to hire people that you can trust to do the work that is expected of them. You know, and that comes down to just, you know, this self-discipline. When you're at home, are you able to accomplish it without turning on the TV, or, you know, do you get distracted too easily? And as we get more and more remote, I mean, I know I've been saying for about 10 years now that I'm going to be doing this from a beat, but I have a reasonable expectation that in the next 10 years, there's not going to be a municipal office. You'll have a police department, maybe you'll have a court, and you know, that's about it. The rest of it could be done via kiosk. You know, everything will be online. There's really going to be no reason to be physically in person. You know, everything can be automated. Obviously, you know, my perspective is always on a productivity, not a, you know, the face-to-face, the emotional aspect of it. But I think that's in the foreseeable future. And Darren, I see your question down there about you know, needing to meet face-to-face, and that's exactly what I was talking about with the cultural difference. You know, and I think that will shift over time. I still see that a lot. That there's a definite face-to-face requirement as it exists today. You know, even with governing bodies, it's so much easier. You know, residents have a lot more courage when they're on a Zoom meeting than they do when they're physically in person, staring at, you know, governing body on the dais. So it's interesting to watch how even the governing body meetings evolved.
It is. So, Chris, we have somebody that's requesting that you talk about how you're doing this, your productivity methods at the next GFOA conference. Chris has been volunteered before to do sessions, so he loves that.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're done. I think we're ready to move on to the next group.
Okay, let me, I'm going to launch the poll question. before we move on. If you guys are okay. Here you go. First question, is your building open to the public? And again, this is for credit, so you have to fill it out.
John Mooney, one of the
Okay.
things that that I saw from that client software that we could use to get our PBC list, the clients, it's easy for them to prove now that they gave us document. Easy for them to show that they gave it to us, and I think that can eliminate some frustrations on CMFO on their part.
Agreed.
Is that the only question? The polling question, anyway?
Yeah, there's one polling question per session. Do we see the results of it? Did I miss it?
I did. Did you not see them? Can you see that now? So 59% say no, 40% say yes, 2% say soon.
Okay. So our next session is the COVID-19 vaccine and the workplace. And we're lucky to have Fred Knapp and Jonathan McMean from Laddie, Clark, and Ryan here. Fred leads Laddie, Clark, and Ryan's alternate dispute resolution practice, serving as a mediator, arbitrator, and hearing officer. He's also active in the firm's employment, labor law, and government services practices, calling on his 35+ years of experience. Fred was also appointed Morris County prosecutor in June 2014 until his retirement in November 2020. Prior to his appointment as the Morris County prosecutor, Fred served as Deputy Attorney General for the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice from 1979 to 1983 in the appellate, trial, and casino prosecution sections. In 1981, he was appointed as Special Assistant U.S. Attorney and was assigned by the Department of Justice to the Organized Crime and Racketeering Strike Force. In that capacity, he investigated and prosecuted organized crime and racketeering cases arising in Atlantic City and southern New Jersey. Fred served as president of the County Prosecutors Association of Morris County, and he made narcotics enforcement a priority with the prosecutor's office and spoke regularly on that topic. In 2017, he was named Prosecutor of the Year by the New Jersey Narcotics Enforcement Officers Association, and he was also one of 25 prosecutors selected nationally by the National District Attorneys Association to serve as NDAA Opioid Heroin Task Force to develop a national strategy to combat the epidemic. Jonathan has practiced law since 2003, concentrates his practice on representing employees injured in workplace accidents throughout New Jersey. He has represented hundreds of individuals who were injured in workplace accidents, takes a personal interest in each of his clients' cases with the intent of successfully guiding them through a difficult time in their lives. He has extensive knowledge in the area of workers' compensation and has resolved hundreds of cases. He also has experience in workers' compensation, led to his listing as a rising star by New Jersey Super Lawyers magazine. In addition to his extensive work in workers' compensation, he also performs the duty of municipal prosecutor in a number of Sussex County municipalities and has prosecuted over 45,000 individuals charged with traffic and criminal offenses. And lastly, Jonathan has handled various commercial litigation matters for both individuals and corporations, handled both plaintiff and defense litigation with a concentration on the areas of collections, contract dispute, and construction contractor disputes. And he's very active in the local community where he serves and works and has volunteered his time as a board member for the Center for Prevention and Counseling, a local organization that provides a vital function to the local community in helping educate about the consequences of drug and alcohol abuse, as well as helping individuals recover from this type of abuse. Gentlemen?
Thank you very much, Bud. I appreciate it. And I want to thank Nisivoccia and everyone who's involved with the roundtable today for giving us the opportunity to give a presentation. A couple of things I wanted to mention just before starting. I'll talk about the workplace issues, and then John is going to address workers' compensation issues. We'll try to split it as much possibly equally between the two of us, and hopefully leave some time for some questions at the end. One thing that I want to point out is that between the beginning of my career and the end of my public sector career, I sandwiched in almost 30 years of private practice representing public and private employers. So I'm back doing that now, in addition to the alternate dispute resolution practice here at Laddie Clark and Ryan. Few things. One, I have to obviously give you a disclaimer that anything we say today is not legal advice. That if you have any issues that arise in your workplace involving employees and COVID, we strongly urge that you consult with your attorneys and with your governing body, as it may be, before taking any action. But we're going to provide an overview today. The source of the information I'm providing all comes from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission guidance. Those of you who don't know, I'll try to be as basic as possible. The federal agency charged with enforcing civil rights laws is the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That includes the Civil Rights Act, Title VII. It includes the Americans with Disabilities Act, and several others, which I won't get into, that may be not as pertinent to our discussion today. In New Jersey, we're blessed with the law against discrimination, which is even more broad in its coverage to employers than the federal law. The federal EEO laws, depending upon which one you're dealing with, are limited to employers of specific sizes. In New Jersey, the law against discrimination applies to all employers. There are no exceptions. So, and it is very, very stringently enforced by the state of New Jersey. In fact, those of you who have been following the news see that our current director of the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights was just nominated by Governor Murphy to be the next justice on our Supreme Court. So it's obviously something that is regularly in the news, particularly here in New Jersey. It goes without saying that the workplace has changed dramatically. You all know that. I'm a dinosaur. I am first to admit it, that while I was a county prosecutor going back in March of last year when the pandemic started, I went to work every day. I was there 5 days a week, every day, and we observed all the CDC requirements concerning masks, social distancing, you name it. And we had a number of our employees, obviously, who were out and about with the public, who were directly exposed to the virus, and we had to deal with that on a regular basis. We had over 150 employees in the prosecutor's office. Everyone was tested when they came into the building every day, much as I'm sure you are at your workplaces. The sheriff's office was in charge, and we had automated temperature monitoring within our office. We would require people to self-report if they had any issues involving exposure to anyone who was COVID positive, or if they had any symptoms themselves. And that was published to the employees regularly, over and over again. As we had situations arise with members of the office or members of other departments that we interacted with, we would emphasize and refresh everyone's knowledge of their obligations. And the same thing should be done in the workplaces that you're in. You should regularly reinforce that information to your folks, so that they're aware and they're not spreading the virus or exposing people unnecessarily. New Jersey had over 24,000 COVID-related deaths. And I unfortunately will tell you, 2 of my family members, close family members, died during the pandemic. So this is something that's very personal to me and my family as well. So far, New Jersey has had 2.1 million first dose vaccinations. There have been over 1 million second doses. So we're well on our way to the goal the state has established of 70% of the adult population being vaccinated. Currently, the adult population in New Jersey, we have approximately 16% of our population that has been vaccinated. So we're probably far ahead of the curve in terms of the national picture. The enforcement agencies that I mentioned to you and the laws that they enforce are directed towards protecting employees. That is what they are about. So when you deal with these agencies, and if you have to deal with these agencies as we do on a regular basis, it's important to tread very carefully. Everything you say, everything you do is held under a microscope. And I would guide clients and members of the audience here to be very careful when dealing with those agencies. If you are contacted by either the EEOC or the Division on Civil Rights, the first thing you should do is contact go up through your chain of command, whether it's your municipal administrator, whoever that should be, so that you get your municipal attorney or your solicitor, as the case may be, involved, so that there are no missteps in the process. I would definitely emphasize that, regardless of where you are or who you're working with, for your own protection. The New Jersey law against discrimination, as I said, is all encompassing. They rarely issue regulations, but the EEOC does fairly regularly issue what's called guidances and occasionally regulations as well. These are issued to the public, which mean employers and to others. Let me just give you the source of the most recent guidance is at www.eeoc.gov/coronavirus. So you can access all the information that I'm giving you today there. We did not prepare slides because my experience is people are reading from the slides. I'd rather, you can always look it up afterwards. So if you have questions, we're more than glad to help any way we can. Although we are in a pandemic, the EEOC is continuing their enforcement to this day, as is the Division on Civil Rights. They have given deference to a large extent to the CDC guidelines, and I would urge you, if you're not familiar with them, to follow them. I'm hoping that you are. The first thing I did touch upon was workplace testing, and obviously an employer may administer tests to detect the presence of COVID-19 virus when evaluating employees for either initial or continued presence in the workplace. As has been said, the workplace has changed. I would imagine that the overwhelming majority of the people on this conference are working from their homes or Costa Rica, as the case may be, wherever. I wish I was there. But John and I are in the office, and several of you are as well. We work staggered shifts in this office, as I'm sure you do as well, to minimize exposure. We conduct hearings remotely. The courts are predominantly remote at this time, although that's supposed to change in the next 2 months. But when I talk about COVID testing, there has to be a line drawn. We're not talking about the antibody testing. which is considered a medical examination. And if those of you have had both, I've had both. I've had the regular testing, which is either the nasal swab or a saliva testing. That is not considered a medical test, or medical exam rather. However, the antibody test where they actually draw blood is considered a medical exam. So you, as an employer, you cannot conduct antibody testing. You can direct that your employees have the normal COVID testing should the need arise. As I said, employers can screen employees entering the workplace and largely cannot or do not screen employees if they are teleworking for obvious reasons. If people can work remotely, they do. I will give you a perfect example. My son, who works in New York City, hasn't been in his office in over a year. He works entirely remotely. Excuse me. He's changing jobs on Monday, going to be with a firm in Jersey City. He's never been there. For the foreseeable future, he won't be there. All of his work will be remote. His wife works for the City of New York Board of Education. She has worked entirely remotely for the last year. Neither one of them have stepped foot into New York City, although that's their primary workplace. Now, obviously, with us here in New Jersey, we have a different situation. You're dealing with distances that are much closer, and people may need to come into the office to access materials, as I said before. But employers are allowed to do temperature checks. They can ask COVID-related questions. They require masks to be worn. They can do social distancing, and they can also require or establish additional precautions. In our office here, we do have some plexiglass barriers to avoid contact, to avoid potential spread, all of which is permitted under the CDC guidelines. As I said, though, not the antibody testing. You can ask people in your questioning, COVID-related, if they have come into contact with anyone, but you can't ask them if a family member has been infected. It's a very, very important differentiation to follow. And if you go through the script from the CDC, you'll see that. If an employee refuses to be tested, they can be, quote, excluded from the workplace. And what does that mean? That does not mean fired. That does not mean terminated. That means they work remotely. Or if they are infected, they may have to take a leave of absence, as the case may be. Please, please, please know, and I'm sure you do, that all employee information related to health is strictly confidential. Any of the questioning, anything that you do must be held in confidence. You can only disclose the employees' names to public health agencies if it's determined that the employee is infected with COVID-19. At the workplace, I can tell you what our practice was in the prosecutor's office. We had a very, very small administrative group. We met daily to discuss COVID issues. If we had someone in the office who was exposed, we would keep that information amongst that group. We would do contact tracing. For example, if an employee was involved with another agency off-site, and we subsequently found out that that employee came into contact with someone who was infected, we would then contact trace. We would go to that individual and determine who that person had been in contact with to the extent possible over the last 14 days, so that we could prevent any possible further exposure or potential infection. As I said, and what we did, and as you know, if someone tests positive, they can telework. If it's not possible for them to telework, and it may not be, in our office, we had detectives, investigators attorneys who could all work remotely predominantly. There were some that couldn't and some that had to work outside the office. We would minimize that. We would reassign people to different units so that we would avoid that contact. But there are alternatives that have to be examined. One key factor to understand, and as I said before, these agencies I mentioned and the laws that they mention are protective of employees, so that the absolute last thing that anyone is going to be authorized to do is to remove somebody from employment. And when I say remove, I mean terminate. That is the ultimate last resort, capital punishment, as they say, for anyone under these laws. At all purposes, you must seek to accommodate, if possible, anyone who has special needs. If someone is exposed, as we said, we can work remotely, and that is the key accommodation under COVID, remote workplace. Or if they can't, to set up an alternative within the office, or providing additional PPE if that's required, like plexiglass or a different workplace, a different setting. What happens if someone tests positive? You've just hired somebody. Well, the first step is, as part of the employment process, if you're going to offer a position to someone, as you're probably familiar with the term conditional offer of employment, which is conditional on a number of things. It can be conditional upon a negative COVID test. If that's the case and someone tests positive, they can only be tested after the conditional offer has been made. After the offer has been accepted, you can then test them. If they then test positive, you can delay their start of work until they are negative, until they're no longer positive. But that is allowed. And people ask, well, what about people who are in a higher class of potential exposure? People over age 65, people who have comorbidities. You cannot deny them equal opportunity. That's the law. People say, well, I wanted to hire somebody, but that person was over 65, or that person had a pre-existing issue. Maybe it was obesity, excuse me, maybe it was pregnancy, maybe any number of things. You cannot, as an employer, take it upon yourself to deny them employment. It goes without saying, but I'm saying it. I want you to make sure you know that. So what about the vaccine? Okay, well, obviously, New Jersey, as I said, is ahead of the curve. Just, here in Morris County or Sussex County, we have mass centers for vaccination. Go to the Rockaway Mall. I was fortunate enough to be vaccinated, had both my shots, and we're as I said, well on our way to the possibility of meeting that 70% goal. The EEOC guidance I just mentioned that was issued in December of last year, the most recent one, does provide for limited employer vaccination. And you've probably read about this. Do I recommend that you start vaccinating people? No. I think it would be very ill-advised for employers at this time to either arrange for or require that employees be vaccinated. That may come in the next few months, but at this point, we're only a few months into 2021. There are no test cases before the courts that we have seen. There's nothing at this point that provides us with the necessary guidance that I could say comfortably to you, tell your employees they must be vaccinated. That may be coming. That may very well be. The EEOC has said that vaccination is not a medical exam. So therefore, employers not seeking information about the current employee's health impairments. And you have to be very careful about that. When you're questioning employees, They cannot be asked about any current health impairments, but they can be asked, have they been vaccinated? That's it. That is the question. Nothing beyond that can be asked. You can ask the normal pre-vaccination screening questions, subject to limitations on disability. You cannot ask any questions about employee disability. If the employer does decide, and I hope no one in this audience does, to administer an examination, either mandatorily or voluntarily, the EEOC has said that the vaccination must be job-related, there must be a business necessity, and there must be a direct threat to the health or safety of the employee or to others. If you want to have voluntary vaccination and tell your employees, we want you to, but it's not required, again, you can ask the same pre-screening questions. If an employee goes to a pharmacy to be vaccinated, you should instruct them that they are not to get into any health-related questions other than the standard questions that we ask prior to coming into the workplace. Can an employer ask or require employees to show proof of vaccination? Again, asking for proof of vaccination is not a disability-related question. However, be very careful. The employer must not ask any additional questions as to the employee's health, other than were you vaccinated or not? That's it. Nothing beyond that. The employee should be told not to provide any medical information beyond that which is required, which is, have you been vaccinated? If the employee says, I want to be vaccinated, but I can't because of a disability, what is the employer responsible for doing then? The employer must show that an unvaccinated employee would pose a direct threat due to a, quote, under the EEOC guidance, a significant risk of harm to the health or safety of the individual or others that cannot be eliminated by reasonable accommodation. So that's a mouthful. But basically, if you want to tell somebody, look, unless you're vaccinated, I'm going to exclude you from the workplace, you must show all of the foregoing. All of that must be shown. And what they call, this is called an individualized assessment that must be made. You must determine the duration of the risk, the nature and severity of potential risk, the likelihood that potential harm will occur, and the imminence of the potential harm. So all of these are hurdles that an employer must overcome in order to remove someone from the workplace if they decline to be vaccinated. But again, you can exclude them from the workplace. You can say you'll work elsewhere, we'll give you an accommodation, etc. What happens then if there is no reasonable accommodation? Absent an undue hardship, the employer may take certain actions. What's an undue hardship? An undue hardship is not just additional cost. An undue hardship must be a significant burden on the employer. And once again, the employer cannot automatically terminate an employee. You must determine if other rights apply before the employee can be removed from the workplace. You have to attempt what they call a flexible interactive process. And those of you familiar with the law already probably have done this with other employees going through the disability process, where you meet with them. I had a fantastic office manager at the prosecutor's office who was particularly adept at doing this. It's a skill that most people don't have, but meeting with the employees and working with them and determining what they need in order to get their job done is key. And obviously, as I've said before, the purpose is to identify workplace accommodation options that don't constitute an undue hardship to the employer. And finally, as I just closing with again, reemphasizing all of this must be strictly confidential. So at this point, I'll turn it over to John McMean to address the workers' compensation issues.
Hi, thanks everybody for having both Fred and I here. We work, this is kind of a good thing because workers' compensation matters tend to flow into employment issues. And that's why I might bounce a question or two off of Fred that are relevant to a lot of municipalities out here. And I know we have a lot of municipalities logged in today to hear things. Now, I am a petitioner's attorney. I've handled many workers' compensation cases on behalf of clients. So my thought was today, maybe I should give you the flip side of things, how to maybe protect yourselves from certain claims, specifically the COVID-19 situation. I could tell you in the petitioner's bar, there's been a lot of evolving of these claims, and they could sting you pretty quickly. And I could tell you where I'm going to get to is some issues on vaccinations, as well as a COVID-19 plaintiff's, a petitioner case where an employee says, I got COVID-19 at the workplace. These claims are really evolving, and it's something just to be on the lookout for, because I'm going to tell you the background of what's going on in the petitioner's bar on these claims. Now, just going to go really briefly, workers' compensation, most people know if you get injured on the job, and I would assume everybody who's logged in today is seeing a workers' compensation claim, especially with municipalities, you're entitled to 3 benefits. Basically, if you break your foot on the job, if you're a DPW employee, if you're an office worker, you're entitled to all of your medical paid, as well as you're entitled to 70% of your salary, up to $969 a week, as well as what's called a permanency award. That means if you broke your leg, if your leg was 100%, what is it now? Is it 75% good? And you're entitled to some compensation on that. Now, most municipalities have insurance carriers. Some people are self-insured. Most corporations have insurance carriers where there could be some self-insured exposures. However, but the issue is, if you get dragged into a workers' compensation claim, it's going to bring some questions. An attorney, the respondent's attorney, is going to ask the municipality some questions about, what happened, where it came from. So they can bog you down a little bit. But when it comes to the claims I just stated was like a broken foot by a DPW worker. The Workers' Compensation Act also provides workers' compensation for something that's called an occupational disease. And when I get into the world of occupational diseases, our world of COVID-19 is an occupational disease. An occupational disease is, for example, is something that where there's exposure, but it's not a one-time thing. So if you broke your foot on August 19th, it happened on August 19th. When it comes to occupation or exposure, there really is no time frame. So you may have been exposed to, for example, a chemical, a tick. There's a lot of there's some Lyme disease questions out there, where it starts affecting your body and your performance and your ability to work. That's what an occupational exposure is. Carpal tunnel is an occupational exposure too. So as I said, there's no fixed date. But however, the question when it comes to COVID-19 or any occupational disease is, when did it happen and where did it happen? Okay. Now, the law in respect to the COVID claims right now is, as I should tell everybody, Governor Murphy signed into law a law that says there's a presumption of being contracted with COVID-19 if you are an essential worker. Okay. Essential workers are defined as doctors, nurses, medical professionals. However, they also expanded the essential worker category as to basically people working in a pandemic who have exposure to the public. This includes grocery store workers. This includes construction workers, gas station attendants. So it's kind of expanded that. So it begs the question is, so if you're in these categories of, quote, an essential worker and you obtain, you get COVID-19, there's a presumption it happened at work. Now, when you're dealing with a municipality, I'll throw the question out there. You have a DPW worker who's exposed to COVID-19. Now, DPW workers are not in this essential category as defined by the new law. So the question is, are they going to be eligible for workers' compensation benefits through a municipality if they were exposed to COVID? It's a question I want people just to think about, because are they an essential worker? I think there's an argument that they are an essential worker. I think there's also an argument they may not be essential workers because they're not exposed to the public the way a grocery store worker would. Something just to think about. And the reason I say this is the standard for proving that an essential worker contacted COVID-19 at the job is very low when you're defining it as the presumption is that you got the disease while at work if you're an essential worker. Now, just want to talk about reports have said, basically, I'll go back, there was a Lyme disease case where a gentleman obtained Lyme disease while working at a golf course. He also had a dog. We don't know if he did it at the golf course or he got it at the golf course or he got it from the dog at home. However, the Supreme Court of New Jersey stated that basically it's a standard where contracting a occupational disease is more probable than not. So if the guy's working on the golf course, it's more probable he obtained Lyme disease while working at work. Now, I say that standard is low because I think that it comes into the office environment and whether, it comes into basically the office setting and whether you have an employee who claims they were exposed to COVID-19 at their office or at the municipality or at a corporate setting, and they file a workers' compensation claim on you. Now, the issue there is, here's the way I preface it. The question is how do you set up your workplace right now? For example, if you have a whole group of employees, say on the second floor, all 10 of your employees suddenly came down with COVID-19, I think there may be a presumption that something went around your office, okay? However, alternatively, if you had one employee who obtained COVID-19, I don't know if you had the presumption they got it from the office. So my thinking on these situations when it comes to protecting office spaces, and something that Fred mentioned pretty briefly, is a staggered office schedule where you can eliminate the presumption that they obtained COVID-19 at the office. So, for example, as I said, if a group of people all got it, there could be a presumption that it happened at work. And as such, there could be workers' compensation claims filed against either a municipality or your corporate, your corporation. And that's just something to think about. And as Fred has mentioned, hybrid scheduling is both good for employment as well as for a workers' compensation claim possibility. And I know people, when they do these hybrid things, are thinking about the protection of their employees, but you also got to think about the protection of your own company when it comes to workers' compensation potential claims. Some of the COVID-19 matters involved right now are complicated. We haven't taken I haven't represented anybody on a COVID-19 claim that has come in. I've gotten a zillion calls on people who've gotten the disease and are sick, and then the question is where they got it. There's so many unknowns right now in these cases that I think they're a little bit difficult to prosecute. I think that's good for municipalities and corporations. Yeah, not yet. Yeah, that's a good point. One of the people said not yet. So I think that there's a couple problems with COVID-19 cases right now. Is number one, we really don't understand the disease at all. Okay, we're learning it, but we don't know it. Secondly, the question I have is, what is your permanent disability? Is there going to be a permanent ailment for COVID-19? I mean, are you going to have permanent respiratory issues? Are you going to have something happening with your body that there might be a permanent injury? I don't know. We don't know. Lastly, I don't know if we don't, since it's such an evolving disease, do we have any kind of doctors or experts that can say, hey, this is what the disease is, this is where it's contracted, and this is how it's going to affect the employee for the rest of their lives. That's the world of permanency. We just don't have these issues right now. I know as the law develops and as people put these claims through, and I'm going to tell you right now, I have colleagues, not in this firm, but who have been filing a lot of COVID-19 claims when in respect to police officers, nurses, and doctors who have contracted it, just to see where they go. And as I said, I'm not comfortable with it right now, but I can tell you it's coming, and the municipalities need to be thoughtful of that. That's what it goes back to Fred was saying, is protecting your workplace, so people don't file these claims. The other thing I could tell you is to be on the lookout for is a potential psychological claim from somebody who is afraid to go to the workplace because say an office now is open hybrid, and say they're loosely following the mask requirements, the protocols. Say your office, some people put the mask on, some people don't care, some people have a political opinion about it. Now you have that one employee says, I can't come back to work anymore, okay? Because I'm being exposed to this, and I'm very protective. I have a family at home who could be, exposure could hurt them, say grandparents or something. I could see a possible psychological development in the workers' compensation claims for people who are, quote, now afraid to go to work. It's something you got to think about on these cases. It always takes like one real problem case to become a significant problem for your company. And as such, just be careful of that, because I'm starting to see that evolve in the plaintiff's bar. And it's something that, as I would defer to Fred, it's something as an employment lawyer where you got to be careful on how you handle your employees, because you could get, I've had psychological claims where people have been permanently disabled. A permanent disability on a workers' compensation matter could be $500,000 to $1 million claim against the municipality. And it's just something to think about on how to protect yourself. And back to what I could say to Fred is I think you have to enforce your safety protocols across the board. And I think that falls into, I'll punt that one to Fred. It's something to avoid these type of claims. Fred, do you agree with me on that when it comes to?
Well, the claims are coming. There's an army of plaintiffs' lawyers out there, workers' comp and otherwise, that are prepared to file claims related to COVID. And as employers, all we can do is be as cautious as possible, respectful of people's privacy and rights, to insulate ourselves to the extent we can from potential claims. Someone has a chat question about when they open up the office and employees refuse to get the vaccine, can we be held liable if the visitor contracts COVID? Who knows? These cases haven't been litigated yet. I can't advise you, but I would say the likelihood is someone will have a claim, like whether it'll be a workers' comp claim or whether it'll be a third-party claim. Something will be in the courts in the coming months and years on COVID. There'll be thousands of claims filed. So, all the information that we're giving you today is based upon a limited view. 1 year's experience with the virus, and trying to be as protective as we possibly can.
And Fred, thanks a lot. And I know we're kind of getting pressed for time, but I just want to go quick into the vaccination issue also in respect to COVID-19 and workers' compensation. I want to preface, and I have an analogy to this because there is some case law on the issues that are relevant to whether, for example, I am now a business and I require my employees to have a vaccination before they can come back to work, okay? Now, what happens if something goes awry with that vaccination and that employee? There's a very strong possibility that the employer or the municipality could be on the hook for a potential workers' compensation claim because they made that as a condition of employment. That goes to a case, for example, there's a case out there where there was an office retreat where it was required that everybody went to the office retreat. A person fell and broke their leg, okay? That was a workers' compensation claim, okay? Because I think the office retreat may have been playing golf or was the facts of the case, but they were forced to go. I make that analogous to doing mandatory vaccinations. I know Fred addressed some questions about the employment and mandatory vaccinations. However, you got to think about the mandatory vaccination versus voluntary vaccination. If you're a voluntary, you're saying, yeah, hopefully you can vaccinate, we recommend it, but it's not mandatory. I think that takes it out of the realm of workers' compensation should something happen bad on the vaccination. Again, as I said, we're getting into territory that's very new, and we haven't had a whole lot litigated yet on these cases because it's evolving. But it's just something to be thoughtful about in the world of workers' compensation and how workers' compensation can mesh into the world of employment. So I just want you to think about some of these things that I have raised today and how to protect yourself. And Fred is right. I am in the plaintiff's bar, but I haven't taken COVID-19 cases because I don't think they're ripe yet, and I think there's a lot of questions that are associated with the claim. But I will tell you that people I know that are doing this kind of work, they're stocking up their gun, they're putting bullets in their gun for these COVID claims. So it's just something to be careful for. Some of the things that both Fred and I have said, just be careful with how you handle your workspace and the issues, the nuances that have come up where you could potentially get claims. And I think it's going to be the beginning. Unfortunately, it's going to be the beginning of it. So moreover, that's kind of all I have to say, unless Fred wants to jump in or.
Nope.
And I know we're just pressed for a little bit of time, but that's COVID-19 in a nutshell in regards to workers' compensation.
I know that John Reinhardt said he had a question. I'm daring fate by asking him.
No, I think you guys hit on all the questions. I think
Okay,
the
good.
concerns are somebody like me that refuses to go get the vaccine. What do you do with that
Yeah.
person?
Well, that's a very tough issue, and we would have you in for an interactive dialogue. One thing I did neglect to say, I should point out, some people may refuse to take the vaccine for bona fide religious reasons, and the EEOC guidance says that they should be presumed to be valid. However, if an employer has serious questions about the validity of that belief or the person's commitment, they can actually conduct an investigation. Again, I would tread very, very carefully in doing that. It harkens back to my first jury trial decades ago when a potential juror was wearing a lapel pin, and it was right about this time of year between St. Patrick's Day and Easter. And I had no idea what the lapel pin was for. And I asked the judge, who looked at me incredulously, to ask the juror what the pin was for. And it was obviously some religious purpose that I was not familiar with. And it didn't help my case, let's put it that way. But you have to be very, very careful on these areas and be guided accordingly.
So if I form the Church of Holy Mattress, I'm covered?
Yeah, good luck with that one.
No, I think you guys did a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Kicked out. I lost my connectivity for a little bit. So we had some questions, and I think from what I understand, those questions were posed for you guys, or you guys answered them as part of your presentation.
Thanks. Yes, I think we did.
Okay.
I did have one question. I was gone for maybe 5 minutes during your presentation, so maybe you covered it and I missed it. But in the world of social media, if you have employees that are reluctant to come back to the office, yet you see them out and about at bars or on vacation or like Chris Battaglia down at the beach or whatnot, is there any recourse to, if you want those people in the office and they won't show up to your place of work, but they're able to go out and do whatever else they want? Is there any recourse as an employer?
Well, first, if you see them on social media, do you know that they are doing what they're doing on working time? That's the first thing I would want to determine, because things can be posted 24/7 on social media. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it was done during the workday. And if it was done during the workday and that was actually a person's scheduled work time, obviously that could potentially lead to disciplinary issues if they were supposed to be working remotely at that time and they weren't. As an employer, you have legitimate concerns that can be addressed.
But even above and beyond that, I mean, the rationale for not working in the office is they're not comfortable being around people, yet here they are at 8 o'clock at night off on their own time.
That's a slippery slope on that one. You know, that one I'd have to think about more
Okay.
closely.
Just didn't know if you had seen that or not.
Not well. We're actually going to be addressing those issues in a future seminar in a couple of weeks on social media in the workplace and First Amendment issues.
Okay.
So you can keep tuned. That one's
Yeah, I'd like to. Sure.
That one will be for the Chamber of Commerce. Tom Ryan and I will be presenting on those issues.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks again.
Okay, we have a
John,
polling question, right, Bud?
Oh,
Oh, boy.
polling question. Sorry.
We have another polling question. Here we go. All right, hang on. This was the first polling question. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this now. Hang on. I got it.
John Mooney, if I post this picture online, does that mean I'm not at home?
I was just giggling at that one. Yes, that was.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you or do you plan on getting the vaccine?
That's not fair. It won't let me answer.
That's weird. Yeah, right. Because you don't want to get.
I said mine outright. I'm going to wait the first 2 years. Everybody seen I Am Legend?
Yes,
Yeah, they all got
Yes.
vaccinated, right?
I did see that.
All right, we have 64 of 67. Everybody answer? I won't answer, but good. Okay, 63% yes, 19 no, 19% not sure yet. There you go.
Thanks, Laura.
Okay,
Our next session is budgeting for 2021. It's a panel discussion. We have Karen Finero from the Borough of Chatham. Karen is the CFO at Chatham Borough. Gabrielle Simoes dos Santos is the CFO at the Town of Harrison and is also the second vice president at the New Jersey GFOA. Jim Burnett is the CFO and assistant administrator at the Borough of Madison. And John Mooney, Ray Sarinelli, and myself, both RMA CPAs at Nisivoccia.
Okay, thanks, Bud. I'll kick it off. My internet's a little spotty. I apologize if it kicks out. Hopefully Karen and Gabby can fill in from there, rooting for the Boilermakers to make it to the Sweet 16. So for that, excuse my COVID beard and also my raspy voice. I'm home and not feeling 100% living under the weather. Is it okay if I share my screen, guys? Is that the way you want to do it?
Yep, that's probably the easiest.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of the guidelines that we use here when we're presenting, myself and Administrator Ray Cody, and go through some actual slides that we're presenting here at the Borough of Madison. And I'm going to go through them real quickly, and then Gabby and Karen are going to talk about some issues that they faced during COVID and how they actually did an excellent job planning at a time. So suggested strategies, just educate everyone, anticipate their questions. Years ago, when Robert Califoot was CFO, they had people asking about copy releases and wanting the Edmonds runs and things like that. We pivoted that away to put people to strategic discussions and decisions instead. I hate to say it, but make sure they understand the Board of Education is the largest, probably the largest portion of the property tax bill. Remind the residents the value that they get for the small amount that they pay in municipal taxes. This is very important to Ray and I. We make sure all the elected officials are on the same page with us and that we have the votes. We don't want to walk into a situation where we don't have the votes on a budget. Get respected individuals and professionals to support your position. And here go some of the slides. We have some serious revenue deterioration in our court from 173 down to 67, and who knows what it's going to be this year, probably maybe under 100. We have serious revenue deterioration in our daily parking at the train station. We have serious revenue deterioration in interest on our balances from 425 to certainly probably less than $75,000 or $100,000 there. And we're just trying to explain that, you know, there's a serious problem here. So $697,000 in revenue, and we're thinking maybe we'll get to 100 this year. That's a $600,000 loss in revenue. A lot of this is being, a lot of us, we're positioning it in Madison this way because we have a lot of people coming and saying we should do a 0% tax increase. But aren't you getting money for COVID relief? Yes, we're getting money for COVID relief, but we don't want to absolutely do a 0% tax increase this year. So we talk about COVID relief, how much we think we're going to get. The fact that the funds specifically say it cannot be used for property taxes, that the funds can be used for investment, and therefore that we're recommending a 2% tax increase this year on existing homes. We typically have increasing assessments that may not happen in the upcoming years, but the last 6 years, every year there's been an increase in assessed rateables. So we always talk to the point of what the existing home is going to get in terms of a property tax increase. That helped us have 2.5% increases on the total tax revenue and only a 2% tax increase on existing homes. That helped us to do that over certain years. We present a smaller budget, and this is actually a legacy document from Robert Califat's days that we've expanded a little bit. Not going to go into the details, but it's just a document that actually residents can go onto our website and go back to literally 1995 and see what our garbage costs were back in 1995 versus what our garbage costs are now. So it's just a way to kind of boil it all down and get the elected officials off of looking at copy releases, paper clips, looking at the bigger issues and the trends of the bigger issues. We always want to make sure they understand the department appropriations. The mayor has some kids that come every year to be the mayor for the day. And they, one of the questions, he actually does like a family feud. He gives them some budgetary information, then he plays family feud. And the question is, what are the top 6 most expensive departments in the borough? And he has the buzzer, and we have the family feud music and everything, and the kids love it. It's just important for people to know that, you know, probably not too different for you all, that it's sewage treatment, library, if you do your own garbage and recycling. We have our own fire department, a paid fire department, public works and police. Probably not that different for similar communities to Madison. We show 5-year trends. Of course, we all know that there's ways for us to show and move budgets around and certain expenses around. So of course, finance is down 8% because we want to make ourselves look good. That's kind of a joke. Pension costs, I think it's just important for them to understand the number of employees in each of the pension systems, the cost and the cost per employee. And we explain to them that, you know, a police or firefighter can retire after 25 years and immediately get a full pension. So a police officer that's hired at age 22 retires at age 47 and immediately receives a full monthly pension for the rest of their lives. They worked maybe 25 years and they're going to get a pension for 30 years. So that's why this is so expensive, and that's why the decision to hire or expand a uniformed officer position is something that they need to take seriously. Obviously, I'm sure you all look for opportunities where responsibilities that are done by the police and fire can be done by non-uniform officers to save funds. Water utility, always love to show historic photos, and Tom, our water foreman, always loves the fact that he always asks, am I going to be in the picture again this year? Always a great idea to show staff and show them the respect that we put in the picture of them in the presentations. We have schedules for the water utility that show revenues, expenses, and the generation of fund balance and how the fund balance is trending or tracking. We use a term that we kind of snitched from Summit called free balance, which is you take your fund balance at the beginning of the year, you subtract out how much you're going to transfer over to the municipal budget, which we do a healthy amount here in the borough. And there's that term free balance. It's not anything that John or Bill Homa or Jason or anyone teaches in the classes, but it's just a number that that they're used to understanding. And we'll talk about that in a second. We talk about the investment in water infrastructure. You know, a lot of this is to make the elected officials look good and support the budget and let the residents know that we are investing in capital. This is our water utility. We have a large automated water metering project we hope to get done and deploy this year, but who knows with the pandemic. We do a water utility rate comparison. I wish I could block off Chatham Borough. Sorry, Karen, that I have Chatham Borough and Florham Park in there. But look at how I sent this to Karen because, Karen, go ahead and show your elected officials how much better you are versus American Water. So we are positioning ourselves for a water rate increase. Obviously, the legislation that's passed is making that something that can't happen immediately, but we need to look at a water rate increase. And so putting information like this out is important. It was a slide from last year, so this is based on last year's figures. We talk about property tax breakdown and how COVID has impacted municipalities. We actually created a budget tax calculator because the residents need to understand how the property tax breaks down. This is from a document we put out every year showing county, school, and borough. We've had very little tax increase over the last number of years from 2013. So we created this little widget, and if a resident goes onto the webpage and types in their taxes right now and say, I think I pay about $15,000 in taxes, it gives a breakdown of their taxes from 2020 and 2013 and the increase of each, the county, the Board of Education, and the municipality. So when they come and they complain about their tax increase, we say, well, this is great, but I think you're at the wrong meeting because your taxes went up $1,800 and the borough is responsible for $127. The Board of Ed does get a little upset with us, but to be honest with you, the vast majority of residents, I think, at least in Madison, are much more willing to support investment in Board of Education, and they understand the costs and why that has to go up. We post some articles just to let them know that everyone's struggling. We talk about the transparency and fund balances. Transparency is critical. We have an annual budget process page on Rosenet that has all the financial documents. It lists out every presentation we've given, even every year, so people can go back multiple years. And it's really helpful to constantly use the term transparency whenever you can. And I apologize for talking quickly, but I know we're short on time. So we discuss fund balances in the various and reserves in the various pots that we have. And unfortunately, we do that because we have an elected official that's really past elected official that lost re-election that's really pushing for it. And the other elected officials that are on the board request it. But in this particular year, obviously, our fund balances and reserve levels are dropping. This is where we talked about free balance. It's showing our free balance in the municipal, in the electric, and in the water utility, and how it's dropped significantly over the 2 years from 2009, the beginning of 2019 to the beginning of 2021. And I want to give a shout out, which I meant to do in the beginning, to all the auditor team at Nisivoccia for all their help. Val Dolan is great. Caitlin Tanucci, Bud, give her the top score you can in her performance review. She deserves a praise. This is a document that we put out every year. It's an actual 2-page flyer that we put out and mail with our tax bill. Again, a little bit focusing on the Board of Education. Ray and I had a big debate for years and years. He wanted me to change the pie. So the Board of Ed was bright red, and I fought him. But then one year, the Board of Education took a bunch of shots at us. So Ray and I capitulated and made it red. And at the very next meeting we had, because we have meetings with the Board of Education to go over shared services, the first thing they said was, why'd you change it to red? But anyway, it's a nice document that we put out that explains what's going on and all the value that residents get for their taxes. We even put a smaller budget in there. So we had that one-sheet budget summary. We had the user-friendly budget, which very few residents look at. We had the state budget document, which I don't think any residents look at. So we even have this much smaller, boiled down, 10-line budget that we put in that document to explain to people. It's very interesting. A lot of people call me and say, I didn't realize that garbage cost that much. Tax appeals is a huge concern for us, I think probably for everybody. So we're talking about that a lot at this year's budget presentations. Few articles on how the empty office space is going to be a problem. In Madison, we have Geralda Farms. Geraldine Rockefeller Dodge had an estate in Madison, and it was sold off and became an office park. and we have a number of buildings in there, and nobody's moving in, and lots of people are moving out. We talk about our tax appeal reserves. We talk about the revenue that, or the challenges of having to pay when someone wins a tax appeal, and how we can't go back to the Board of Education or to the county and have them kick in. We've got to pay the whole amount. You all understand that, but I really don't think the vast majority of the public or elected officials understand that. This is a list of our 8 largest taxpayers. We have a total tax levy of about $74 million. So $6 million of $74 million is significant. And we have some concerns with legislation that the governor passed that could potentially make Atlantic Health pivot off of paying tax and go to a per bed fee on a rehab center that they have. And we do also have a pilot, so that's not going to be impacted. But this $4.9 million, we'll probably lose, we could lose all of this $380,000, and this $4.9 million, I think it's fair to say that we're going to, in the next year or two, lose 10% of that tax levy. So it's important for the residents and the elected officials to understand that. We do this cute little thing where we show a town with 4 homes and 1 vacant lot, and how taxes are $45 in 2018, and then in 2019, a new home is built on the lot, and taxes go up to $50, and how this home's property taxes didn't go up at all. And that development, what we're trying to basically explain is that development, if done properly, is not a terrible thing. People like to complain about McMansions and things like that, but the bottom line is you do want to have people investing in the town and hopefully resulting in increased ratables. So kind of in summary, we remind everyone and remind the elected officials to keep in mind where the tax rate and the increase in taxes is coming from. And we highlight all the things that they get, an average assessed house. And we do this a little differently. We don't change this number. I know a lot of CFOs will take the tax listing, the tax rolls, and say, what's the average residential house this year? And do their taxes and compare. We just take this one house. It's on Green Village Road, $667,200 assessed value. And we've used that home, which is almost dead center in the middle, as an illustrative example of their taxes and what's happened to those taxes on a yearly basis. When you have increasing assessments, it's a much better example, and it goes back to that, showing what the taxes are in an existing home and how they change year over year. And we explain that these are all the different services that you're getting for your tax dollars, and that the 2% tax increase is less than my chai tea latte in terms of monthly basis, the monthly cost that I bought at Starbucks yesterday. So I'm going to just pivot over to Karen and let her talk about Chatham's perfect.
Thanks, Jim. And Jim, I like your presentation because it's definitely a different perspective, I think, than on a lot of the presentations that we see municipalities give for their budget. Usually it's just a strict reporting on where the revenues and expenses are and what the taxes are going to be. And you really kind of do a whole public relations effort, which I think is helpful. Definitely gives me some ideas. So anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on with Chatham Borough. And some challenges that we faced in 2020 that now is leading into 2021, 2022. I started in Chatham in November of 2020. And when I started taking a look at their 2019 books, their fund balance was doing fairly well. It was actually trending on the up. But once you get there, you start to realize they really were relying very heavily on their revenues, meaning any revenues that they realized in the prior year, they were basically maxing out in the budget the following year. So when you have such a loss in revenue from 2020, it really was going to be a deep impact for them. So particularly, there were 2 revenues that we were taking a really close look at and that were down. And that was parking. We don't have a utility, so that revenue comes in through the current fund, and then also our municipal court, which I know a lot of towns are dealing with the same issues. We also were looking at an eroded fund balance. So at the end of 2019, they ended with about $2.8 million in fund balance. About 2.2 of that was used in the budget, which left about a $580,000 balance. We were projecting, with the AFS, our result of operation was only regenerating $1,775,000 without doing any sort of special COVID emergency. So you could see that we were down now significantly, almost $445,000 from what we used in the budget. So we were not regenerating enough. And if we didn't do any sort of special emergency, our projected 2021 fund balance would just be a little over $2.3 million. So if we were relying on the same amount that we used in 2020 for the 2021 budget, you'll see that we wouldn't have much of a balance left. There were also some other things that happened. So in 2020, some revenues were shifted that were reliable MRNA resources, which was interest on investments and cable franchise fees. So those were things that, because they were taken as MRNA, they automatically would go to fund balance at the end of the year. But in 2020, those were anticipated, and those were used to offset certain expenses, which is fine. But one of the issues is your regeneration of fund balance, and the other issue is we never met the mark on what they put in for interest on investments for anticipated. So again, that was another revenue loss. We had some other things going on too. We have a county ordered reevaluation that has to be completed by 2021. So we have $325,000 worth of special emergencies on our balance sheet that we have to think about for future budgets. We have a PBA contract that expired 12/31/2020 that has not been negotiated. So again, we have to take a close look at the PD budget and how that's going to affect future budgets. And there's also almost over $1 million in accumulated absence liability for people retiring. And there's only a $30,000 reserve currently set up on the books for that. So how are we going to take a long-term look at this for maybe people potentially retiring in 2021, 2022, the breakage and all of that? So Jim, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yep.
So here's how our 2021 budgeting addressed some of these challenges. We had to take advantage of all the tools that the state had put out there. So we applied for a special emergency. It was approved by the state for $300,000, particularly for our loss in parking and court revenue. So this bumped our fund balance up to $2.6 million. So we still would be able to use the same amount of fund balance in our 2021 budget and still have a bit of a balance left. We did have to take out an emergency note for this because of the large special emergency that we had for the reevaluations, because our fund balance is almost a little bit papered over. We also took advantage of the average of the 2018, 2019, and 2020 revenues. We're going to be approving that via resolution at our next meeting. Without doing this, we would have automatically, if there was no change in our budget, had a 1 cent increase in our budget, which equals to about $212,000 in increase in our amount to be raised, or that would equal to $212,000 in expense cuts. And that, when you're looking at a percentage, it would be a 2.5% increase in municipal taxes. Typically, the borough has had a more recent policy of sticking to a 2% increase. So I mean, off the bat, with just the revenue loss, if we didn't take those averages in, they would be above what they typically do. And I mean, there's expenses that all the municipalities got hit with, large pension bills. And also a key to the 2021 budgeting for us is really doing a good budget projection. Really mapping out some of these long-term effects of taking advantage of some of the tools that the state has afforded us. So we have to map out the $625,000 in special emergencies over the next 5 years. When are we going to have to bring that $300,000 special emergency online, which will be next year? So that's going to be an automatic $60,000 increase in our budget that we have to factor in. Start mapping out the retirements to plan for those large payouts. Start budgeting for some of those payouts to maybe move into a reserve. Try and plan when some of these police officers are leaving, or just municipal staff is leaving, so we can figure out how we're going to pay for them. And then also address some of the revenue challenges in the long term. We're trying to get away from relying so heavily on some of these revenues. Like for instance, we have a rental tenant, it's a school right behind town hall that pays over $500,000 a year in rents. They're planning on leaving. So what are we going to do? I mean, it's going to take them a while to find another place to go, but we are now going to have to plug a $500,000 revenue, $500,000 revenue loss in our budget. But, you know, there are some good things that are coming on. We're going to be having a pilot coming on in 2023, 2024. So how does that play into that revenue loss? Do you anticipate that whole loss, that whole addition? So it's just really, really important that you project out your budget so you can take into account some of these challenges and see really what's going to happen over the next few years. That's kind of where we're at right now. So I will now turn it over to Gabby, because Gabby probably has some good solutions to some of these challenges.
Thank you. So it's never easy to go after two very well-spoken people, but I will try. And I'm certainly going to try to bring a little bit of a different perspective. So I've been with Harrison for 10 years now, and a lot of what municipalities are dealing right now with in the wake of COVID is what I inherited when I came 10 years ago into the town of Harrison. And that is all of these budgetary issues that are really stemming from a revenue problem. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of history just so that you know kind of how we got to where we were and the challenges that we dealt with and what we've done over these past 10 years so that when COVID hit us, we were in a much better fiscal position to deal with these things that we certainly didn't see coming. So right before I came, just historically, Harrison was an industrial town, lost over a third of its ratables just due to basically industries and factories closing down, becoming dilapidated, losing the ratables, becoming environmentally compromised, and at the same time having a PATH station in town, having the entrance to various major highways, and being nestled between Newark and other busy municipalities, we took on a massive redevelopment plan. The problem is that the income that was scheduled to come through the redevelopment plan, the pilot revenue and everything else, didn't necessarily line up with when certain debt service payments came online and other challenges that we dealt with. And so therefore we had several budgets that relied on one-shot revenues that depleted reserves and fund balance. And so ultimately when we came in 2010, or when I came in 2010, we had basically $280,000 in fund balance and reserves on a $41 million budget. At the time, we were a transitional aid town, and we had our aid cut significantly. We had also massive retirements, which resulted in us having to take out a special emergency in order to be able to fund them. Our credit rating tanked, so we had very little access to the market, and the access that we did have was at a very high cost of borrowing. And our cash flow was obviously affected, and so going out for TANs was a challenge. And during all of that, one of our largest taxpayers was appealing based on an exempt status, which means they didn't have to keep their taxes current. So it was kind of a perfect storm, and it created an opportunity for us to look at what we were doing and seeing what we had to do to go forward in order to fix all of these issues. And the reason that I bring that up is because a lot of the decisions that municipalities made in 2020 are going to make in 21, are going to make in 22, are going to have lasting consequences. Those decisions are going to affect now, they're going to affect the near term, and they're certainly going to affect the future. So I kind of want to speak a little bit to the things that the town did little by little in order to put ourselves in a much better financial position, dealing with not only COVID, but other things that have come up over those years, things like Sandy and the other things that municipalities have dealt with. If you want to go to the next slide, please, Jim. Okay, so the first one, which is obviously the most painful, is slowly increasing your tax base. It's never advisable to have a 0% tax increase. Always take advantage of the fact of your ratables increasing for that year and you know, maxing out on what the average tax impact is per household in the town, and being able to talk to your governing body and helping them understand how if you have a continuous 0% tax increase or a low tax increase, that you're just setting yourself up for a more challenging time in the future. Because we were under transitional aid, we certainly had the help of the state providing some leverage and forcing us to do certain things. We had a couple painful tax increases early on, and then we were able to stabilize that going forward. The big one is replacing one-shot revenues with recurring revenues. If you can't regenerate it on an annual basis, then you also shouldn't be spending it, which makes you take a really long, hard look at your budget. At the time that we dealt with what we dealt with, the municipal tax levy and the miscellaneous revenues that were recurring together were not sufficient to support probably our public safety budget alone. And so we had to take a long, hard look at what services we were providing, how much they were costing, and were we able to afford that. One of the things that came of that was we really took a look at our TO for our public safety. And at that time, there were certain decisions that were made, again, with the help of the state and working carefully with our public safety officials. And we reduced the TOs, or the table of organization, for our police and fire department at that time. We didn't lay anyone off, although there were layoff plans, but what it resulted was that through attrition, as people retired, we reduced our TOs and our overall costs for public safety, which is always a very difficult thing to touch. I understand that. But in difficult times, you have to make difficult decisions. And that's why you have to look now at the consequences of the decisions that you're making now and what position they may put your elected officials in later on down the line as far as making these difficult decisions. The big one that I know we saw guidance from the state, and I know as CFOs that it's something that we consistently do, but really peel back all of your balance sheets, look at your reserves and see if there's certain things that should either be canceled or should be tapped into to be used for certain one-time expenses rather than running them through your budget. Constantly stay on top of your grants to make sure that your receivables and your offsetting reserves match up so that you're not dealing with any kind of hits to operations. Make sure to review your utilities. I mean, one of the things that we had gone through was we had a very low connection fee for our water and sewer utility. And we had all this redevelopment coming online. And when we started researching other towns and what they were doing with their connection fees, we were able to create a great source of revenue in the water and sewer utility, which helped to build up some capital. And then in that sense, not necessarily have to rely on the operating budget for some assistance as far as capital was concerned. The big thing that we focused on over 10 years was not so much building fund balance, but really building up our key reserves. And the reason that that's important is because it helps you deal with these one-off issues, which I'll go through. It restricts the use of those funds, which is always a helpful tool as a CFO, especially in dealing with your governing body. It helps build up your cash flow. And so these are all things that, that become great tools for a CFO. One of the things that was big for us is a reserve for tax appeals pending. Not only did we appropriate a line item that then we transferred into that reserve on an annual basis, but every year we were forced to do an accelerated tax sale early on with the transitional aid process. And so we had a near perfect collection rate. And every year what we would do is on sheet 22, we would reduce our tax collections by a certain amount, move it into tax appeals pending, and build up that reserve. The reserve for storm recovery. Anything that we didn't spend in snow removal or even in that line item, we would transfer to so that at the end of the year we could transfer out of and build up that reserve, which has obviously been a massive tool because they continue to expand the uses for that reserve. And so that is a huge, huge help for these one-off expenses that pop up when we have things that we didn't necessarily see coming. The reserve for compensated leave. So in 2010, I started. In 2011, we had a mass exodus of police and fire. We had huge payouts and we didn't have the money. So we had to go out for a special emergency, which obviously then creates a burden for future budget years. So we started to, at the end of an appropriation reserve year, anything that was left over in salary and wage line items, we started moving it into a reserve for compensated leave, and we started building that up to really get to the point where now we're 100% funded for what our compensated leave liability is. And again, if you need to tap into that and cancel a portion of it, at least at that point, I mean, there's always a possibility, especially after COVID, we know anything is possible, but I don't think that there's gonna be a day where 100% of your employees are gonna retire. So if you need to cancel a portion of that to deal with some 1 or 2 year issue, at least you feel comfortable knowing that you're gonna drop that from 100% to maybe 90% or 80% with the goal of building it back up. Another huge issue for the town is that we have a massive debt burden, and The rating agencies downgraded us in 2010. We've had several upgrades since then, but we did not have great access to the market. Cost of borrowing was very high. And so we needed to really build up our capital improvement fund because we needed to start paying for things in cash. We couldn't necessarily burden any more of the future budgets with additional debt service payments. And so this became another big goal for the municipality. Look at your debt service schedules going into the future. If you see that there are any dip-offs, take advantage of that. Maintain that level of budget and move that money now into capital improvement fund. If you all of a sudden have 1 year where you know there may be a one-shot revenue coming in, anticipate it and put the offset into capital improvement fund so that you can build up that cash there as well, and you create flexibility for yourself. Another thing that Karen spoke about was that they had to do a special emergency because they were ordered to do a revow. Start putting some money into your budget, anticipating having to do a revow, and every year transfer it to a reserve for revow, which is another reserve that you're able to have. These are all the tools that if you rely on them year after year, little by little, when you get into a circumstance like we are in right now, you're going to have plenty of cash and you're going to have plenty of reserves that have been built up that if you need to tap into them for a 1 or 2 year fix, you can. The special emergency is a great tool that the state provided, but it's going to create a burden for future budgets. And COVID is going to impact us for many years to come. We have been able to deal really well with everything that's happened, despite the loss of revenue, because of the position that we're in. But one thing that we are struggling with significantly, actually, is we have a parking utility. That parking utility that we took over in 2019 did really well. We generated a significant amount of fund balance. And in 2020, a utility that was generating $6 million barely generated $2 million. Fortunately, we adopted a very conservative budget. We were able to deal with it. And another issue that presents itself is that if you have a utility and you don't want to use a special emergency, you can raise that deficit in your operating budget. We did that because we had offsetting redevelopment income, so we didn't have to raise taxes to deal with that particular issue. But now I'm dealing with a cap issue. So these are all things that you have to, every single decision that you're making that's a COVID response decision, look at how it's going to impact you this year, look at how it's going to impact you 3 years down the line, look at how it's going to impact you 10 years down the line. One of the things that Karen spoke about too was that she's got a pilot coming online. We have a lot of redevelopment, and one of the things that we have done that has helped us significantly is, so for example, if you have a pilot that has commercial development on it, they can take a land tax credit. We knew that we were going to have a revow coming online, and I knew that the cost of the land in our redevelopment area was going up significantly. So when the revow took place, the land values were going to shoot up, which means land tax credits would be greater, and my pilot revenue would come down significantly. When I started anticipating our pilot revenue, I was very conservative because I knew the day was going to come where those numbers were going to come down significantly. So when you have things like that come online, really read your financial agreements, figure out what's going to happen, what are the phase-in schedules, so that if you can anticipate more conservatively and generate that fund balance, when those breakage points come online, you've already anticipated them and they're not going to cripple you in a future year. So that's pretty much everything that I have. I hope it was helpful, and I don't know if there's any questions.
So Gabby, you talked about some specific items for how you built your reserves. I was wondering if Jim or Karen, if you guys have any other thoughts for a way to build some of those reserves.
Well, I know formerly when I was in Mendham, anytime we got a FEMA reimbursement in, we put that in the storm recovery. And we made a significant, I think we got like $240,000 for Storm Quinn. That went right and built up our storm recovery trust. So when you get, those one-time revenues, instead of letting them go to Myrna, maybe use them for the source that they came from in the first place, the storm recovery, like specifically for FEMA. And just over time, we did the same thing with the salary and wages to bring up our compensated leave reserve. Also in Mendham, and the plan would be to do the same thing in Chatham. I know in Chatham right now on the current fund balance sheet, they do have they have some FEMA money coming in, but we haven't yet by resolution moved it over into the trust. So that's something that we'll do over the next month or two, and it'll be a start, which is good.
In Madison, we're in a situation where we actually had significant balances across the board in a lot of different areas between capital improvement. We're a pay-as-you-go town right now. We haven't incurred debt except for upcoming debt for our sewage treatment in a number of years. So we were kind of challenged in trying to convince them to build up certain balances. However, it's justifiable for us to spend $1 million in the water utility, even though it only generates about $2.4 million in revenues, replacing water meters, because we did not have an incremental approach to replacing water meters. There are water meters that are 30, 40, 50 years old. BPU regulations want those water meters swapped out sooner, but we're not obligated to follow BPU regulations. So when we know there's lost water there, we've installed an AMI metering system for our electric utility and our water utility that's radio frequency, and we have 90% of the electric utility installed, so all these reads come in, and so we are able to reduce our meter reading staff, but the water utility is a lot harder to do, so we're going to have to subcontract out. So we convinced the elected officials to set aside money for that. So our typical reserve process in Madison has tended to be more project specific, where we've been able to convince them to set the money aside. But any way you can do it, just do it, right?
John and Ray, have you guys seen anything else in any of your towns?
Well, the best thing that I can do is, I would tell you, is that, you know, it comes down sometimes to the governing body or to the CFOs. I mean, everybody here on this panel seems to be on the same page when it comes to doing this and padding the reserves as much as they can. I've had one CFO tell me, well, I'm not hiding money, so I refuse to do that and hide money. Like, it's not hiding money. It's preparing for that rainy day. And I had a committeeman tell me the other night, I don't care what happens next year. All I'm concerned with is what happens this year. And it's like, how do you get across to these people about how important it is? That's a topic for another day, that we have something. And I don't want to say that it's all CFOs, because it's not. And I don't want to say it's all committee people, because it's not. The ones that actually listen put themselves in a much better position than the ones that don't. And they were the ones that rely upon their professionals, whether they be CFOs, collectors, auditors. Those are the ones that seem to get a lot easier and have better years and fewer budget meetings as time goes on. Much to like what Gabby was saying, you know, money comes in, salary and wage line items, we just sweep that into compensated absences at the end of the second year, you know, rather than lapsing it back in. You know, we see a lot of different things, again, with FEMA, like what Karen was saying. So anywhere you can squirrel some money away for that rainy day. And listen, I had money budgeted for compensated absences in the municipality, and I just got the audit, and I saw that they were at their threshold because they don't have a large liability. So we were able to take that out of the budget this year, you know, but we didn't pull it out of the budget. What'd we do with it? We put it into the snow removal budget, you know, so that we know if the snow removal doesn't come in, we don't know where it's going to be this year, but hey, it's built in there now, and we can just move that money over into storm recovery as time goes on. So.
And I also think I think to point out what Gabby said about debt service, never let your debt service fall off in your budget.
Nope.
I know, like in Chatham, at the end of 2023, we have a bond falling off. So, I mean, that money is going to start to move over right into capital improvement fund, where we're going to stop, you know, taking out a short-term note for a police car. We'll pay for cash in that, because I mean, that's questionable whether you should do that anyway. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out.
I mean, we also work with our school. So we're a type 1 school district. We have to go out, you know, to bond for them. And they had a big drop off in their debt service. And so we worked with them, and, you know, we said, your drop off will become our increase. We'll level off, we'll create some capital cash, and that way we'll even deal with school issues going forward. And so that's how we handled that this year. So we like to actually, contrary to most municipalities, we're Abbott, so we don't have a huge allocation of the property taxes for schools. So we work closely with them to present our rate and the school's rate together to show what the overall tax impact is on the average home, and it works well for us. So every single municipality is different. And then another thing is, and just speaking to your point, I mean, yeah, you're definitely going to have some of your stakeholders say, I'm not worried about next year, or whatever the case is. But, you know, And a lot of times you'll even have, oh, the state will bail us out. Like somebody's going to have to help us. But every single tool that comes down the line comes with strings attached. 2012 was the last time we permanently financed debt in the town. And I mentioned to you before, our credit rating had tanked. So it was not a good circumstance. So, you know, what's the alternative? Hey, let's tap into Qualified Bond Act, right? This is great. We can piggyback off of the state's rating. Well, guess what? When you go into Qualified Bond Act, which we did, they withhold all your debt service payments from your state aid. If you have a cash flow issue, this is only going to make it worse. So really know what tools there are out there for you and know what the consequences are of using those tools. So yeah, there's some great resources. I mean, I was fortunate enough to work under both Tom Neff and Tim Cunningham, and they worked so closely with us. They really understood that we were trying to get ourselves into a better position. And so I understand that we had some of that leverage from the state to help push along some of these initiatives. But it's really, you know, just a matter of whatever it is that you tap into, know what the consequences are. The special emergency is a main example, right? You're borrowing money and you're, in a sense, kicking the can down the road. You have to raise it over your next 5 budgets, and I don't know what they're going to look like. So,
Yeah.
Ray, did you have something?
Yeah, just on that reserve question, one of the things that I think didn't get mentioned was the reserve for sale of assets. If you know, similarly to putting the FEMA reimbursements into your storm recovery, you know, you don't have to let that sale of assets fall into your fund balance. You can set that aside as a reserve on your balance sheet, which is same thing that can be used at a later point in time. Usually I always try and encourage for something specific. And I actually have one client who adopted a resolution that specific to one particularly large sale of an asset, they restricted the use of it to one-time projects, so large capital projects. So that's another area that we've discussed a lot about, is working with your elected officials on not just looking at this current year or even this year and next year, but down the road of where things might go, and encouraging them to have the forethought of, you know, a bridge might collapse or a road could be damaged, and you know, how are we going to pay for that? And if you have a reserve for sale of assets, it's something that you can tap into without having to go to the taxpayers to say we have a pretty large expense that we're going to have to deal with. So just another thought on how to build reserves. I know kind of all goes in line with, you know, how healthy is your fund balance, and what are your elected officials, what's their foresight, and how are they looking forward? So just another thought.
Yeah, Ray, and to that idea, you know, whenever I'm with my clients going through the budgets, the ones that care anyway, you know, one-time revenue, one-time expense, and that's how we look at it. So and that sale of asset money has really helped towns, replace some equipment over time. I have one town who's in the middle of, they sell their property that they own, that they've foreclosed on, and they were sitting on almost $1 million worth of property, and they take 5 or 6 a year now, and they just go in and they sell it, and then they crank everybody off of the tax title lien list as well. They go in, they foreclose, and then they just have more property. So to them, it's almost a recurring revenue that eventually is going to end, but they don't look at it like that now. They look at it as one-time revenue. So now they have the new, you know, big plow and the new dump truck and the new this, and, you know, and they can do all of that without raising taxes. One-time revenue, one-time expense, and done. So good point there.
So what, Karen, Gabby, Jim, what are you guys' thoughts on the American Rescue legislation, and any plans for it for 21 or going forward?
Well, I don't know if any of us really truly know how we could use it for 2021 yet. It seems it could be very limited in scope of how you could use it, when we'll get it, what the restrictions are on it. So, I mean, at this point, it's really, I think, up in the air. I know people have said, well, maybe you could use it to reduce some of your, you know, your debt service or capital projects, but it looks like it could be limiting in that, or maybe you can only use it for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So I don't know if you would be able to all of a sudden, pave some roads. And then to use it for your revenue loss at this, it's difficult because, like, for instance, I don't know if my parking revenue is going to come back. So how am I supposed to use that for revenue loss? That's just kicking the can down the lane. Because eventually when I guess that relief money's gone, that revenue still is not there. So it'll be interesting to get some more guidance on what we can use it for and, a smart way to use it.
I'm in the same boat. I agree with Karen. I mean, I think that the fact that we can use it through 2024, I'm totally hands off for this year. I want more guidance. I'd prefer to introduce and hopefully adopt, if anything, postpone after hearing, just in case anything else comes through that we really need to take into consideration. But if I can balance my budget conservatively this year, I'm going to, and then I'm gonna, help use that resource going forward. I mean, CARES money was certainly helpful, especially with a lot of the public safety overtime that we had and stuff with the health department and PPE and retrofitting some of our buildings and whatnot. And we're still using it through the first quarter of this year. We're actually depleting the rest of our funds now. But I would say hands off at least until 2022 budget year.
Yeah, in Madison, same thing. Trying to pivot people off the idea that, oh, we're getting so much money, let's do a 0% tax increase. That's the biggest drive we have here. There's so many unknowns going on right now. I talked about tax assessment, talked about the tax appeals, I should say, talked about revenues. We have an affordable housing obligation. We hope to get the low-income housing tax credits. We should, but we want to be explaining to the residents that, well, what if we don't get those low-income housing tax credits? We signed an obligation with Fair Share Housing Center to develop and build. So we will have to use tax dollars to do that. Don't anticipate it, but it's all that type of stuff we're trying to add. All of our collective bargaining agreements are coming due at the end of this year. So that's an unknown factor. And there's just a number of unknown factors that we have to explain that. And then, as Karen said, we don't have the rules. So why on earth would we even be talking about it now and risking the chance of losing that money because we don't know the rules? So we'll see what happens Monday night.
And from, an auditor's perspective, this money screams supplanting, right? That's the biggest issue for us as far as looking at the downside of this money. Is it supplanting what we're doing currently? And then is it subject to reimbursement to the feds later because we supplanted the money? So I personally don't like the idea of putting it in the 21 budget. I'd like to see it in a future capital, possibly, depending on when the guidelines come out, as far as what we can use it for, or doing a 159, so it's specifically related to a project or purpose later on if the guidelines are issued. So there was a question from the panel about using, or from the group about using a 3-year average for all of their revenues, fees and permits, court, swimming pool. Can they be included in one resolution? And which 3 years are you using for the 3-year average?
So I included all the revenues that we're doing it for in the one resolution, and you have to use 2020, 2019, and 2018. So you average those, and then from there you come up with what you're going to anticipate.
Be interested in finding out if there's any towns that are not doing any revenue averaging. We're doing just a few. It scares me a little bit when you have revenues that are just not going to come back, like parking and other things like that. I just don't. We have a train station goes to New York City. I just don't see that coming back anytime soon. We're not going to pick up the phone and call the police chief and say, start writing tickets. Come on, we need some court. We can't do that. Police chief Bill of Rights, and also just being reasonable. And obviously the Karen was getting interest, excess interest as Myrna. We were actively trying to throttle back on the amount of fund balance we had because we were looking at it across the enterprise, and we were getting hit by a lot of different areas. And we do have a fair amount in reserves in various areas. And there was a strategic planning initiative back in 2014 that actually pegged how much maximum we should have. It's good. We show that number every year. What's the balance in municipal fund balance as in regard to the size of the total budget. And I'm not thrilled that we're peeling back that the curtain on all that stuff, but that's kind of the position that we're in with that.
So we never used a 3-year average except for the calculation in the reserve fund collected taxes. And I was always told to skip the prior year, the most recent year, and use the 3 years prior to that in calculation. So the change for the 3-year average in revenue is a little foreign to me, and that we're using the most recent year. Do you guys have a different perspective on that?
I think it's the state's way of curbing of adding a little bit of conservative requirement in what you're anticipating. I mean, if you skip 2020 altogether, knowing what's going on now, then you're really putting yourself in a difficult situation. So I think that was kind of their way of putting a little bit of a cap on it. But I know, I mean, for us in particular, we had 3 healthy months of a 1,500 space parking garage, which puts us way ahead of the curve than what we're experiencing right now. I mean, like I said, we were generating $6 million in our parking utility, and now we're down to $85,000 a month. And the month of February, we decided to open it to all of our residents for free because of the snow. So I have 1 month where we probably, I don't even know all the details yet because my operator hasn't gotten to me, but we're probably down to maybe 10,000 for that month. And I had monthly permit holders that are mad that we did that. So, you know, if you're not including 20 in there, then you're really putting yourself in a difficult situation, I think.
And as a firm, we were back and forth with Tina from the state, and she was adamant that the 2020 number should be included, even though in their release of how to do this, it said to do it similar to the RUT calculation, which we've always used the 3 prior years and compared that average to last year's. So there's just a shift of how to do it and what is the right way. But no matter how you do it, you still need to be, even if you use a 3-year average, including 2020, you still need to know where you're going to be. I mean, why would you budget an excess amount of interest when you know you're not going to get it? You know, you still have to bring common sense to the budget and know that you're not going to recoup that. So for putting it in a much higher amount just because you can with the 3-year average still doesn't make sense. I mean, you still have to go in with a rational approach and don't just use that as a crutch when you put your budget together.
So we're past our time. And I know we have a poll question. Laura, I don't know if you want to put it up. And Gabby, you also have a plug you want to make.
Oh, yes, please. So GFOA is hosting the first ever virtual women's conference, but we've been doing this for a couple of years. We have some really, really, really great content. Jennifer Willey is speaking. Her company is Wet Cement, and it's half a day. You can go onto the GFOA website to check it out, but it's got some really great content about communication, imposter syndrome, building your board of directors. It's virtual, but it's also going to be very interactive. So I really encourage everyone. I know it's a busy time, but try and check it out and register. Thank you.
Here it comes. So did you use the 3-year average for your 2021 budget?
Elka also wrote something that when she's preparing her budget, keeps in mind how the rating agencies will look at the decisions that they're making.
We actually are quoting our bond counsel on Monday night, explaining that small incremental tax increases are appropriate. And I'm hoping the auditor that will be on Monday night, our very esteemed Val Dolan, who I have a tremendous high regard for, might also support that position as well. I'm not telling her to do what I'm just, you know, she has to say what she wants to say.
Okay, everyone answer? It's pretty close. Wow, 35, 35, and 30. Interesting.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for your time. Gabby, Karen, Jim, Ray, and John, I appreciate it. John Reinhardt, as always, and Laura and Katie for putting this on. Thanks to all the people that participated, asked questions, threw some chat questions up there. And I think there's a survey after this, Laura, that pops up.
That's right, and that's for your credit. So remember to fill out the survey before you exit out.
Okay. And we'll be sending the certificates out. Do you have an idea?
When we'll send it out?
Yes.
By Monday?
Okay.
Because we have to get the recording.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good weekend.